On a Tuesday morning in the third week of September 1982, a converted warehouse on the eastern edge of Brussels held 214 people who believed they were watching the future of European martial arts. The building had been a textile mill once. The ceiling was 40 feet high and streaked with old rust from iron beams that no longer held anything. The floor had been laid in pine 6 months prior, still pale and unmarked at the edges, dark with resin near the center where the training had already begun to burn its record into the wood. The air smelled of chalk and sweat and the particular cold that settles into brick buildings in September when the heating has not yet been turned on for the season. 214 people filled the standing space around the edge of a 40 by 40 foot training area. Tournament directors from Belgium, the Netherlands and West Germany had flown in the previous evening. 3 journalists, 2 of them covering combat sports, 1 of them covering European athletics, broadly stood at the western wall with their pads already open. A film crew from a small Belgian production company had positioned a single camera on a tripod near the north entrance, though no one had confirmed they had permission to film. They filmed anyway. The man standing in the center of that floor was 21 years old. He weighed 185 pounds and stood 5 feet 11 inches in his bare feet, which were the feet of someone who had been training since the age of 11. His name was Claude Van Damme, and he had in the previous 14 months accumulated a record in full contact karate competition that had stopped being a curiosity and started being a problem for the people who organized brackets. 44 bouts, 41 wins. 37 of those by way of a right leg that moved at a speed that the Belgian coach who trained him had stopped trying to measure because the measurement made him feel old. He was not yet famous. That word would come later, and it would come from a different country and a different industry entirely. But in this building, on this floor, in front of these 214 people, he did not need to be famous. He needed only to be what he was, which was a young man in full possession of a physical talent so uncommon that the people who watched him moved differently when he moved. They leaned, they exhaled, they did not take notes. He was the reason this gathering had been organized. He was the reason the tournament directors had purchased plane tickets. He was the reason the film crew was filming without permission. And in 11 seconds, standing in the 4th row from the north wall, separated from the training floor by 31 feet of pine and chalk dust, and the particular gravity of a young man's certainty, Claude Van Damme would say 4 words to a man he did not recognize, that he would spend the next 40 years unable to take back. Nobody in that warehouse on that Tuesday morning in September knew they were about to watch a lesson be taught that no amount of talent could have prepared either man to give or receive. If you want to hear what those 4 words were, and what happened in the 11 seconds that followed, stay with this until the end. The private sentence that was spoken on that floor afterward was not repeated publicly for 22 years. When it finally was, it changed the way a generation of martial artists understood what mastery actually looks like. Claude Van Damme had arrived in Brussels 4 days earlier from a training camp in the south of France, where he had spent 6 weeks working on one thing: not speed, not strength, distance. His coach, a Belgian kickboxer named Robert, who had fought professionally in the 1960s and retired with a record that impressed no one except the men he had beaten, had made him spend those 6 weeks standing at specific distances from a heavy bag and doing nothing, not hitting. Standing, understanding, learning what 6 feet felt like, learning what 8 feet felt like. Learning the difference between 4 feet and 3 feet, and 2 feet in the dark with his eyes closed until the number was in his body and not in his head. This was not what Van Damme had wanted. Van Damme had wanted to kick. He had one of the most extraordinary kicking instruments in European martial arts, and he wanted to use it. Robert had made him stand still instead. For 6 weeks, and Van Damme, who was not a patient man, had become patient about this one specific thing because Robert had told him something that he had not yet understood but had decided to believe. Robert had told him, "A man who knows distance owns the fight before it begins. He does not need to win it. He already has it." Van Damme had nodded. He did not understand. He went back to standing at distance from the heavy bag in the August heat of southern France. By the time he returned to Brussels in September, he understood. Or he thought he did. In the weeks leading up to the September gathering, Van Damme's name had circulated among the tournament directors in a way that carried a particular edge. He was not simply good. He was the kind of good that forces a renegotiation. The kind that makes established practitioners ask quiet questions about where they stand in a taxonomy that they thought they already knew. He had won his last 11 consecutive bouts without absorbing a single scoring technique, not one. And the records of the organizing body, which were kept in a bound ledger by a secretary in Antwerp who had been doing this for 19 years, there was no other entry like it. The secretary had checked twice. The directors wanted to see it for themselves, and so they arranged the Tuesday morning gathering in the converted mill. And they told the people who needed to know. And 214 people came. Van Damme did not know all of this. He knew that people were watching. He was accustomed to being watched. He stood in the center of the floor and demonstrated 3 combinations in sequence, and the room received each one with the silence of genuine attention. He finished the 3rd combination. He stepped back to the center line. He was breathing at rest. One of the directors, a Belgian named Thierry who had organized sanctioned competition in Western Europe for 11 years, began to speak to the assembly about the development of the sport and what the next year's calendar would bring. Van Damme did not sit down. He remained standing on the training floor in the posture of a man who had not decided whether he was finished. It was at this point that the door at the south end of the warehouse opened. He came in the way people come in when they are early and do not wish to make an interruption. Low, quiet, the door was heavy and he held it from swinging. He wore a dark canvas jacket over a gray shirt, both unremarkable. A cap, pulled to a point 2 inches above the brow in the manner of a man who has worn caps for a long time and no longer thinks about them. Street shoes, not training shoes. The shoes of a man who had not come to train. He moved along the west wall toward the 4th row of observers, found a space that was not quite a seat because there were no seats, and settled into it with the economy of someone who has learned to take up less space than he occupies. He was 42 years old. He stood 5 feet 10 inches in those street shoes. He had not competed in sanctioned martial arts for 3 years. No one near him acknowledged his arrival because no one near him knew who he was. The director continued speaking. Van Damme remained on the floor. And then, because he was 21 and possessed of a confidence that had not yet been introduced to its own limits, Van Damme looked toward the 4th row of the north wall and found the quiet man in the canvas jacket, and said 4 words in the direction of that row, loudly enough to carry. He said, "You do not belong here." The room did not stop. It adjusted. The way a room adjusts when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, and every person in it is deciding independently how to respond to that fact. A few heads turned toward the 4th row. The director paused mid-sentence. One of the journalists, the one covering combat sports, looked up from his pad. The man in the canvas jacket did not respond immediately. He looked at the floor for a moment, not down in submission. The way a man looks at the floor when he is deciding something that he has already decided but wants to be certain about. His hands were in the pockets of the canvas jacket. Then he looked up, and something crossed the room. It was not visible. It was not loud. It had no name in any of the 3 languages being spoken in that building on that morning. But 14 people who were present have since described it in interviews and memoirs and one documentary filmed in 2004. And in every description, it is the same thing. The room changed temperature. Not physically. In the way a room changes when the actual hierarchy of the people in it becomes visible. The man in the canvas jacket removed his jacket. He folded it once. He set it on the floor beside his right foot with the deliberation of a man setting a valuable thing in a safe place. Then he removed his cap. He folded the brim once. He placed it on top of the jacket. He left the 4th row and moved toward the training floor. He did not hurry. The recognition, when it came the way recognition comes in rooms where people know faces from photographs and footage rather than from life. It started at the eastern wall and moved westward like weather crossing flat ground. A judo coach from Rotterdam named Henrik, who who was standing at the east wall and who had trained at a camp in California in 1974, was the first to place the face. He touched the shoulder of the man beside him and said a single name at a volume meant only for that one set of ears. That man turned, said the name again, slightly louder. The name moved through the room row by row, a current crossing still water, arriving at the western wall 6 seconds after it had begun. By the time the man reached the edge of the training floor, the room knew who he was. Jean-Claude Van Damme was 21 years old and had 37 knockout wins, and had not lost a bout in 14 months. He stood on the training floor and he understood, in the way the body understands before the mind does, that something had changed in the room, and that the change was connected to the man walking toward him, and that whatever was about to happen, he had initiated it. He had already lost. He just did not know it yet. If you have been watching this channel and you want to see what happens next, take 5 seconds right now and subscribe. We release 3 episodes every week. Comment below where in the world you are watching from. We have viewers in 47 countries and we read every comment. Now, back to that pine floor in Brussels, September 1982. The man stopped at the edge of the training area. He was now 11 feet from Van Damme. His hands were at his sides. He said nothing. This was the first lesson, though it had not been labeled yet. The distance between them was 11 feet. Van Damme's right leg, the instrument that had produced 37 finishes in 44 bouts, required a gathering step of 14 inches and a commitment step of 26 inches to reach full extension at maximum power. The total travel time from standing position to contact at that leg's peak velocity was 31 seconds. Van Damme knew all of this without knowing that he knew it. His body had computed it thousands of times. At 11 feet, those numbers produced a specific result. At 11 feet, the kick landed. At 14 feet, it did not. The man in the gray shirt moved to 14 feet. He did not step back. He adjusted his position laterally, 2 steps to his left, so that the distance between them did not register as retreat. The pine floor accepted his weight without sound. Van Damme felt the change. This is what the distance lesson actually teaches, and it cannot be taught from a bag or a partner who cooperates. A fighter who controls distance does not make the other man miss. He makes the other man decide. He creates a geometry in which the other man must either commit or wait, and whichever he chooses, the geometry has already been decided in favor of the man who set it. Van Damme had spent 6 weeks learning this in southern France. He was about to receive it. Henrik, the judo coach from Rotterdam, had both hands flat on the crossbeam of the eastern wall. He would remember this later. He had not decided to put his hands there. He found them there. A tournament director named Lucas, who was standing beside the camera crew at the north entrance, had set his coffee cup down on the tripod base. He had not finished it. He did not reach for it again for 11 minutes. The Belgian film crew's boom operator, a young man of 23 named Pascal, who had not been informed about what kind of event he was attending, had stopped moving his boom entirely and was holding it at an angle that was no longer pointed at anything useful. He held it that way for 4 minutes. Second one, Van Damme moved first. He was 21 and he had not been made to wait by anyone on a training floor in 14 months, and his body did not have a patient response to standing at distance from a man who had not yet committed to anything. He stepped left, gathering, and launched the right leg in a high lateral arc. The technique was real. The speed was genuine. 37 men had not been able to respond to it. The man in the gray shirt was not at the point of contact when the leg arrived. He had moved 18 inches to his left in the 31 seconds the kick required. The kick passed through air. Van Damme landed. He did not stumble. He was too trained to stumble. But he was 1 step closer than he had intended to be. Second two. The man in the gray shirt did not counter. He absorbed the miss with his feet, not his hands, resetting to the same lateral distance he had occupied before, 14 feet, different angle. He did not speak. His breathing had not changed. The room had not breathed. Van Damme processed the miss in the way a trained fighter processes the first miss, as data. He had arrived at a distance he had not chosen. The other man had moved without contact. And the geometry was the same as before he had committed. Nothing had changed except that he had spent energy. Third second. The second attempt was lower, a sweep, driven from the hip, aimed at the outside of the lead ankle. Van Damme had finished 2 bouts this way in 1981. The technique was not spectacular. It was correct. It required the other man to either step over it or absorb it. The man in the gray shirt stepped over it, not hurriedly. The way a man steps over something on a sidewalk that he noticed 3 steps before he reached it. Van Damme had now committed twice at speed to a man who had not raised his hands. The room was very still. There is a moment in any genuine encounter between skilled practitioners when the spectators, no matter how trained, stop analyzing and start watching in the way they watched things when they were children and did not have a framework for what they were seeing. That moment had arrived. Second 4. The third attempt came from a different vocabulary entirely. Van Damme closed the distance to 6 feet in 2 steps, and drove a combination from his hands, a jab and a cross followed by a left knee. It was not what this audience expected from him. It was not what the record expected from him. It was correct. Against most opponents at this level it would have landed. The man in the gray shirt slipped the jab, deflected the cross at the elbow rather than the wrist, which redirected Van Damme's weight 2 degrees to his right, and stepped outside the knee so that the knee passed in front of his left hip rather than into it. The 3 movements took less time than it takes to describe them. At no point did the gray shirt rise above the waist of Van Damme's torso. Van Damme was now 4 feet from a man who had not thrown anything. He understood. He stopped. This was the exact moment that Henrik pressed both hands flat against the crossbeam hard enough that his palms went white at the center. This was the moment the boom operator stopped moving his arm. This was the moment Lucas, the tournament director, understood without any supporting analysis that he was watching a thing he would describe for the rest of his professional life. Second 5. The man in the gray shirt moved to 3 feet. He did not strike. He set his right foot beside Van Damme's left foot, with the care of a man completing a measurement. He placed his left hand, open, on Van Damme's right shoulder, not a grip, a placement. The gesture of a teacher rather than an opponent. He brought his right hand to a point 1 inch in front of Van Damme's left temple. He held it there for 2 full seconds. He did not complete the movement. He let his hand fall. He stepped back to 6 feet. He looked at Van Damme. Van Damme looked at him. The room remained stopped. The forklift in the logistics yard 400 yards to the east was moving a pallet. The traffic on the ring road continued. The light kept entering the warehouse windows at the same angle it had entered them all morning, indifferent to what had just occurred on the pine floor below. The man in the gray shirt extended his right hand. Van Damme stood at the fork in the road that this kind of moment always creates. He was 21 and he had a record that no one in this room could approach, and he had just been walked through a geometry lesson in front of 214 witnesses, including 3 journalists and a film crew, and a judo coach from Rotterdam who would not stop talking about this day for the next decade. He could take the left fork. He could manufacture a reason. He could speak about the constraints of the situation or the irregularity of the floor or the matter of an unfamiliar opponent at an informal gathering. He could preserve the record by questioning the context. This is the fork most men take, not from cowardice but from the genuine difficulty of standing in public and allowing the revision of what you believed about yourself. He took the right fork. He took the extended hand with both of his own, the second hand coming around to the outside of the clasp in the manner of acknowledgement that, in this particular part of the world, in this particular tradition, means something more than a handshake means. He nodded once. The man in the gray shirt said something to him then. The words were said at a distance of 18 inches, and directed only at Van Damme. The 2 journalists who were close enough to observe the moment both later wrote that they could not hear the content. Henrik, the judo coach, who had moved to the edge of the floor, could not hear it either. For 22 years the content of that sentence was known only to the 2 men who had been on that floor. In 2004, in a print interview with a French-language martial arts publication, Van Damme was asked about that morning. He confirmed the city, he confirmed the year, he confirmed the approximate number of witnesses, and he disclosed for the first time what had been said to him at a distance of 18 inches on that pine floor. He said, the man told him that the 4 words he had spoken across the room were the most expensive words a martial artist can spend, and that every man who says them to someone he does not yet know is borrowing against a debt he cannot afford. He said, The man told him that the distance lesson is not a fighting lesson, it is a listening lesson, and that he had passed it. Then, as Van Damme would recount in that 2004 interview, the man recovered his folded canvas jacket from the floor beside the fourth row. He picked up the cap, he put both on. He moved to the south door, he held it from swinging as he left, he did not look back. 3 witnesses physically made contact with him as he moved toward the door. Henrik reached the floor from the eastern wall and touched his shoulder as he passed. The tournament director Lucas, who had never met him and would not have expected to touch a stranger, placed a hand briefly on his arm near the tripod where the coffee cup was still sitting, still full. The Belgian film crew's camera operator, whose name was not recorded in any subsequent account of the morning, stepped 1 pace to the left as the man in the gray shirt passed and touched the sleeve of the canvas jacket once, lightly, in the way you touch something to confirm it is real. The south door closed. The warehouse reassembled itself slowly, the way people reassemble after a thing they have no category for. Lucas picked up the coffee cup. It was cold. He drank it anyway. Henrik remained at the edge of the training floor for a long time, looking at the spot where the gray shirt had stood. Pascal, the boom operator, later told the documentary crew in 2004 that he had gone home that evening and attempted to describe the morning to his wife, and had found, for the first time in his adult life, that he did not have language adequate to the thing he had witnessed. He said he described it for 40 minutes, and when he was finished she nodded and he understood that she had received the words but not the event. He said he stopped trying to describe it after that and just kept it. The story left that warehouse the way stories of this kind leave rooms, through the people who were there, and through the people those people told, and through the necessary inflation and selective memory that operates on oral history the way weather operates on stone. By the following winter, the crowd had grown in the telling to 400. By 1985, the duration of the encounter had, in some accounts, stretched to 2 minutes, in one version that circulated through a network of dojos in southern Germany. Van Damme had been unconscious for several seconds, which was not accurate and which the man in the gray shirt, had he known about it, would have found troubling on behalf of both men. The version that held in the accounts of the actual witnesses was simple. A young man had said something careless at volume in a room where the words could not be retrieved. A quiet man had answered him with movement instead of language, and the young man had chosen correctly at the fork in the road. These 3 facts were sufficient. Jean-Claude Van Damme left Europe the following year. He arrived in Los Angeles with limited English and a particular certainty about what his body could do, and a somewhat revised understanding of the conditions under which that certainty was warranted. He carried the morning in Brussels the way people carry the specific memories that rearrange the order of what they know, not as a wound, as a measurement. He has spoken about it in subsequent years in interviews and in documentary footage, with a consistency that the 214 people who were present would recognize. He does not describe it as a defeat. He describes it as the morning he learned that expertise and mastery are 2 different countries, and that the distance between them is precisely the width of what you do not yet know you do not know. He became, in the years that followed, one of the most commercially successful action performers in the history of the medium. He carried the Belgian coach's distance lesson with him into every technical discipline he subsequently studied. He studied several. He did not stop studying. The man in the gray shirt continued to move through the world the way he had always moved through it, quietly in plain clothes, teaching when teaching was appropriate, leaving alone when leaving alone was appropriate, telling the story of the Brussels morning to no one. He did not need to tell it. The story told itself, in the way the real ones always do, through the rooms where people who were there described to people who were not there what it feels like to watch mastery operate in real time on a pine floor in a converted textile mill in Belgium in September. What that Tuesday morning in Brussels holds, for anyone who wishes to receive it, is this: the most dangerous assumption in any room is the one you make before you know the room. The 4 words Jean-Claude Van Damme spent that morning did not cost him his record or his trajectory, or his future. He was too talented and too determined for 4 careless words to take those things. What they cost him was the permanent certainty of a morning in which he did not have to learn something he did not know. That certainty, once spent, cannot be returned. The man in the gray shirt understood this. He did not say it unkindly. He said it with an open right hand and a sentence at 18 inches and a folded canvas jacket set carefully on a pine floor beside a fourth row that had been, until that morning, completely ordinary. And then he walked out into the September light that was falling on the ring road and the logistics yard and the 400 yards of distance between the warehouse and the forklift, indifferent and particular and exactly as bright as it had been before any of this happened. Next week, we will tell you what happened the evening Chuck Norris sat alone in a hotel room in Tokyo in 1969 and received a phone call from a man whose name you will know, offering him the one role that would have made him famous a decade earlier than he became famous, and why he said no, and what that decision cost him, and what it gave him instead. That episode will be up Thursday.
If you are not yet subscribed, the button is there. Use it. Comment below where in the world you are watching from. We will see you Thursday.